I respect everyone until you give me a reason not to respect you. And so we start with that premise of respect. And if we keep it, it's okay. Don't let it get in the way of me liking or disliking. Let me continue to respect. And I think that's where we see some of the greatest wins.
Welcome to the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Likewise, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. Charlie is one of America's foremost authorities on respect and leadership development. And now, here's Charlie.
Hello, my name is Charlie Likewise. Welcome to another episode of the Power of Respect podcast. Today we are talking about the power of respect in business and public policy. My guest today is someone who has had a unique career spanning both business and public policy at the national level. His name is Walter Davis. Walter Davis is a founding member of Peachtree Providence Partners Holding Company, LLC, an Atlanta, Georgia-based private investment and a consulting firm. Walter formerly chaired the Bipartisan Economic Inclusion Task Force for Vice President Mike Pence and U.S. Senator Tim Scott. In this capacity, Mr. Davis served as an advisor and advocate for policy initiatives that create economic opportunities for traditionally underserved populations. Mr. Davis is the former Vice President, Chief Executive Officer, and founding member of Certis Bank, where he oversaw and developed the strategic direction and capital formation that helped grow the organization to a $2 billion multi-state financial institution. Prior to founding Certis Bank, Mr. Davis served as the Executive Vice President of Retail Credit and Mortgage Direct Lending at Wachovia Corporation. Walter is a native of Greenville, South Carolina, and received his Bachelor of Science degree from the University of South Carolina, where he currently serves as a trustee on the Darla Moore School of Business Partnership Foundation. He also serves on the advisory board for Axum Capital Partners, the board of directors for Hub Corporation, and the board of directors for Institute Capital. Please welcome Mr. Walter Davis. Great to see you, Walter.
Great to see you as well, Charlie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. As we mentioned, your career is unique. It's spanning both the corporate world and the political world to some extent. So I was wondering if you could share with our audience how you got started and how your career journey progressed.
So, interestingly enough, growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, in that era, in my family, you were either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a preacher, or a teacher. And so interestingly enough, and when I went off to the University of South Carolina, my goal was to become a doctor. And so did all of the stuff you do, the microbiology and organic chemistry and all of that stuff. And by about my junior year, I knew that was not going to be my path in life once I got to comparative anatomy. But while I was at the university, I worked for a gentleman, Page, at the State House, a gentleman named J. Vern Smith. He was a good friend of my dad's, and Uncle Vern is what everybody always called him. He was probably the fourth or fifth most powerful man in South Carolina politically. And when I was coming close to graduation, my senior year, Senator Smith came to me and he said, what do you want to do when you graduate? And the thoughts of being a doctor had kind of gone out the window. And my role at that point was just to say, hey, I'll be looking for a job. And he said, have you ever thought about banking? And I did not know a thing about banking except, walking into a bank branch and transacting business. And I started looking. He said, go look into it. And so I did some research and, got to the point where I understood that being a commercial banker was something that could be pretty interesting. And back in those days, especially in the South, being Black and being a commercial banker weren't sort of interrelated. And so I went to him and I said, hey, here's what I want to do. And so he said, okay. And so he opened a door or two for me and made a phone call. And I went to interview at the bank and got my foot in the door and sort of took it from there. Now, a key lesson I learned later on and didn't know at that point was that Uncle Vern, as we called him, was the single largest shareholder in the bank individually. And so it's about a $2 billion financial institution back then. And so I took that opportunity and just kind of made the most that I could out of it. Being a commercial banker, there's a gentleman there who ran most of the bank. His name was Mason Alexander, and he took me under his wings and said, "Hey, we're going to make sure that you succeed or fail based upon your abilities, not because anyone gets in your way or anything else." And so he had people help me, but for the most part, he had to do a lot of keeping people out of my way. And so that was a great start for me, and it taught me some key lessons in life. First one was you always need a sponsor, someone who's going to look out for you, some person in leadership position, whether it's either internally or externally, that's actually going to look out for your best interest and not necessarily push you in a way that it's more of a handout, but more of a let's make sure you've got the leg up and the right opportunities here. And so I took that throughout my entire career. And so, as I told you, Uncle Vern was state senator, and so that's what really got me into politics as well, understanding what politics was all about. And so, Charlie, that's how those two worlds kind of meshed for me in the beginning.
Well, that's incredible. The whole idea of somebody mentoring and helping guide somebody along a path to help them understand how to deal with barriers, I think is critical to what we need to do to build trust and respect in business and in culture. So you have significant leadership experience leading and advising organizations across numerous businesses, as I saw in your background. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced as a leader, and how did you tackle them? And perhaps you could share both examples of when it was successful outcomes, and maybe, if you don't mind, some examples of when it was not successful or less than successful outcomes.
Sure. So as I think about that question, I remember the times that I would go into, I only worked for 2 institutions and founded another, so the third. And so really for any length of time. But I remember going into a couple of new roles. One was a really large leadership role that I went into. And it was one of those things where some other folks thought that they should have the job that I got. I came in from the outside. And so, that comes with all of its own challenges in and of itself. And I learned some key lessons there in leadership. And one is create the vision that you want in an organization and really make sure that you get folks on board, especially those who are right around you. And if you can do that, you've got a much bigger chance of success. And then you give them something they could not have gotten on their own. And so if you've been a leader of an organization and you've been trying to get something done, and all of a sudden this other guy comes in and he helps you get it done, then you begin to sort of win over people, not necessarily liking you, but at least respecting what you can do for them, which is a big deal. And so there are other folks who will not get on board. And, sometimes there's an opportunity to reorganize, which I've done before. And, there's a seat that's not open for the folks who don't get on board with the vision. And that might sound a little bit cruel, but in order for organizations to function in a proper way, you have to limit the dysfunctional behavior. And sometimes as a leader, that's one of the toughest things to do, is to eliminate that dysfunctional behavior. And so I'm proud of what we did in this particular instance I'm talking to you about, because it really earned me some real stripes. And it earned me becoming executive vice president in the 4th largest bank in the country, this particular instance. And so I'm really proud of that. There are also other instances where you are building teams from people you don't know. And I've had to do that before. And, I will say that when you read about CEOs taking over or other senior leaders, and people say, wow, they brought in all their own people, they brought in their 4 or 5 people themselves that's been with them. What about us? Well, as a leader, one of the things you want to make sure of is that you've got the people around you that you know and you trust. It's difficult. It's difficult to go through battles, any type of battles, whether it's political, whether it's business, whether it's community wise, and not really have those folks around you that you can trust and I had the opportunity to build a team where I didn't really know everybody around me. And that probably was one of my biggest failures is not getting rid of the folks who didn't get on board with that vision I talked about a little bit earlier, and getting them out of their chairs and making sure that they weren't there. And so that's when I found that I had the most trouble. But for the most part, it's about respecting people's opinions, but making sure that people respect the vision as well. And so as I think about it, those are probably two examples, Charlie, that I think about from a leadership perspective as to where things worked well, really well, and things where things didn't work really well.
I think those are great examples. I think they're classic. Most people listening to this would be able to understand either one of those examples and probably been through them. I think the key that I heard there as well is as you help people be successful, whether you knew them before or didn't know them before, it builds the trust. It shows respect for bringing people to the organization to help others be successful, and that builds the trust for success going forward. And the other side of it is building trust, unfortunately, when there's somebody in the chair that doesn't belong there.
That's right.
In many organizations, in my experience, the people in the organization know who those people are. And, while you give them a chance and try to help them as well in terms of respecting them, as you said, if it's not a match, changing it also shows a respect for the organization and the rest of the folks in it. And I think that builds a lot of trust going forward. So I think those are great examples. Kind of taking a topic out of the headlines of today, so to speak, diversity and inclusion are an important topic in business and in our culture for that matter. Can you share your perspective on diversity and inclusion and the role that respect can play as an element to unlock the value of D&I? Is that something you could share with us, please?
Yeah, I will, Charlie, and it's probably not one that one of your normal speakers would articulate. I come at it with somewhat of a bit of cynicism. Having been around, I'm 57 years old, been in industry for a long time, and we've been talking about this diversity thing for ever since I can remember, 34 years or whatever it is. I've been out here in the workforce 35 years. And so I hear the words, and I've heard the words all the time for a long time. And, I see today as a little bit different, but not too different. George Floyd and his death caused a major reaction in this country where we said, wow, we really haven't done enough. And so we're going to do better. Well, that's reactionary mode. 45 years ago, we were talking about this, and we're talking about how to put people in the pipeline so that we have a diverse workforce, because diversity and inclusion is not just good for certain individuals, it's good for the economy and for society as a whole. And I hope we get a chance to talk about that a little bit later on here. But my cynicism is the why. Why are you doing it now? Is it just, and it is a reaction. And the question becomes, how sustainable is that reaction over time? We see the greatest number of placements right now with diversity and inclusion from a Black perspective. I will say that. For so long, diversity and inclusion just kind of meant everything, whether you had blue or green hair, whether you tied your shoes, whether you were left-handed or right-handed. And it became just kind of a little bit of everything, as opposed to what are we really looking for here? And I'm a big believer in diversity and inclusion because I think we have to have people with different experiences at the table, people with different thought processes at the table, because that then gives your organization, your country, your society, no matter what, your community, no matter what it is, a better chance of thinking about what are the pros and cons of these decisions. Even if we don't agree on the decision, at least it gives us a chance to think about it a little bit differently. And we miss that when we don't have diversity and inclusion in our businesses and in our community leadership, et cetera.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And for me, the true unlocking of the purpose of diversity and inclusion is based in respect. In other words, respecting the fact that the value is there and can be there from the diverse opinions and experiences of folks, as opposed to it being a quota or some kind of other metric of measurement.
Right.
And so I think that's important. And I'm sure you've seen some of that take place where diversity and inclusion may not have been considered the right way to go, but upon having it happen, the value was unlocked potentially for that organization or community. Can you share some of those examples?
Sure. Hey, you think about it. I think about my own career, and the times where I was the only one who was like me at the table, and I think about the times where people, and people are individuals, or they have their own set of inherent biases, and there's some people who don't like you and won't like you, and that's okay in life. That's okay. My goal was to always seek out an opportunity to show people something they'd never seen before. Give them an opportunity to see a different perspective and hear a different perspective that they had not seen before. And so if you think about that, it was all about, for me, gaining respect. I didn't care if you liked me. It was all about respecting me, because all of a sudden, when you respect my opinion, you're going to listen a little bit differently. Again, you might not ever like me for whatever reason that is, and that's always on you. I don't take on that energy. But when you see changes, and changes that are positive changes, because now there's a different view at the table, and I've seen that throughout my career. I've seen it all over where, you know what, I want people around me personally who are different from me and who have a different set of experiences than I do. And when they walk down the street, they get a different reception than I do, because guess what? I can learn from that. And again, I have to respect. I respect everyone until you give me a reason not to respect you. And so we start with that premise of respect. And if we keep it, it's okay. Don't let it get in the way of me liking or disliking. Let me continue to respect. And I think that's where we see some of the greatest wins. And you're big, and you can read about all the things that different people have done in history and wars, in politics, etc., where it moved. That's what to me, that's what now probably has made this country the greatest country in the world, is some of the respect that you continue to see happen each year. Now, we've devolved a little bit lately, and we'll talk about that, but I think if we keep respecting each other, then we can work well together, whether you like me or not, for whatever reason.
Right. And it's not about liking somebody per se. It's not about being right all the time or at any point in time. It's about understanding that other person and their point of view, so you can make sure you can incorporate their thinking in the process, or vice versa. And one of the things you mentioned along those lines was listening, that they'll listen to you. And it reminds me of a lesson that I learned relative to listening, because I'm an analytical person. So when somebody starts talking to me about a problem, in my mind, I'm down the road. I know where they're going. I've got the solution ready. And I'm thinking about that, and they're looking at me like, dude, you're not listening to me. And even though I didn't intend to not listen, I'm not listening to them. And so a friend of mine who was very good at that, and I said to John one time, I said, John, how do you do it? I mean, you're a smart guy, but I'm a smart guy. How come I'm not that good at it? And he said, I'll give you 2 words. He said, listen longer. And, again, 2 words is easier for me to remember than 10. And the whole point was that, if you listen longer, they'll believe, and not facetiously so, that you are listening. And second of all, you may find when they get through what they're saying that they're going in a different direction than you thought.
That's right.
And I marry that in my mind with my thought process. It says, if you're right now, you'll be right later, which allows you to wait to get to the end of what they're trying to do. And that sort of respect, regardless of whether I like their opinion or like who they are or what they look like, shouldn't enter into that. That's respect at the level of one human being to another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important, and it can build performance, as you mentioned, and there's plenty of examples, whether it's in sports, politics, military, et cetera, results of high performing teams that are unbelievable.
Yes, agree wholeheartedly.
So, have you witnessed the concept of respect? And now let's get back to business performance specifically, as it impacts the value creation of an organization. Let's say, as it relates to either leadership development or as it relates to what you look for in leadership of a company that you would consider funding or purchasing as you think about the banking world.
Yeah, part of what you're talking about when you talk about respect at the core in a business, so to speak, is what's the culture of the organization? What's the culture of the business there? Do you have a bunch of yahoos, so to speak, or do you have people who have a concerted effort and are after the same goal? And do they respect each other enough to work together? Whether they like each other or not, do they respect each other enough to work together? And so I always ask certain questions as I'm evaluating businesses, and it starts with that cultural piece, and it starts with how do you go about the decision-making process? Is it a one-person kind of autocratic, here's what we'll do? And you can get up under the covers on that. Is it a by consensus where, we got to have everybody around the table agree that this is where we're going? Or is it some hybrid of, let's make sure we listen to everyone, but at the end of the day, someone has to make the decision. At the end of the day, someone has to make the decision. And so I always look for how you get to the get through the decision-making process. It tells you a lot about people, and it tells you a lot about the business. If you think about CEOs, Charlie, the CEO who grew up in a business and took over more than likely has a different mindset than a founder, someone who's an entrepreneur and grew the business. You think about Jamie Dimon versus a Jeff Bezos. And so two highly successful individuals, but I would guarantee you that their leadership styles are probably a bit different. So as you think about sort of that founder versus that person who got the position, it's that founder respecting others' opinions, because they know they birthed the business, they know it, they know where every brick is laid. What's their thought process on how we get to a certain from point A to point B versus the person who came in and was hired, et cetera, and probably, is a little bit more community oriented from a teammate perspective. And so I just think those are things that you really look at to know and understand. I will tell you, I deal with business leaders all the time. In my world that I've come from, it's a very methodical, very thoughtful process as it relates to decision making and respecting opinions. We've got this one client now who's a household name, and he thinks very differently. And, he tells me that, our communication styles are very different, Walter. He's like, boom, 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 boom. It doesn't matter what you think as long as you're in the communication, versus me having always grown up saying, okay, let me think about it before I respond to you. And so what we're doing, I think, is gaining respect for the way each other works. And so at the end of the day, if it's a client, the client's right. And so so sometimes you have to unlearn what you've always thought to be what made you successful.
Well, I think that's excellent advice. It reminds me of another component of this respect equation, if you will, and that is, the difference between making judgments and being judgmental. It's so important that we're allowed to have our judgments in our mind. I mean, we feel the way we feel. And the example you just gave of two different communication styles is a great one that's likely to be the case many times over. And thinking about how you feel about the other person's communication style is your judgment, and you're entitled to that. When it becomes judgmental, in my mind, is when not you, but the euphemistic you steps over the line and creates a conflict out of that difference, as opposed to what you described was how do I create collaboration out of that difference? And I think that's very important. And maybe you can give some examples, another example or two of where you've encountered that, the difference between your feeling and your judgment of a situation and how you mastered that into collaboration.
One of the things, and that's a great question, Charlie. I would say contextually, one of the things that we sort of lost in this country the last, I don't know, decade or so is that whole thing called civil discourse. You talked about respect and listening and listen longer and how we get there. That whole, if we can disagree without being disagreeable. If we can sort of figure out how we are able to come together, even though we disagree, but we've got a common goal in mind. And it's not my way all the time. It's not your way all the time. It's what's the best way. And it always won't be your way, and it always won't be my way if it's the best way. And so somehow coming together and figuring out what we see there. I probably have served on more nonprofit boards than one could care to imagine, 30 or 40 of them, been in leadership position in a lot of them. And, those are things that really test your mettle in what you're talking about, organizational kind of success. Because one, it's not where everyone reports to you or works for you. Two, it's not where everyone works for the same company and you have a common goal of the same profitability, et cetera. But you're taking people from different households who say, hey, whether it's a school board example or whatever the case may be, and saying, how do we move forward together here in a way that we can really be successful for what counts. And if you think about the PTA or whatever it is, at the end of the day, it's about the children. It's not about what the parents think. And probably one of my greater successes has been, as my children were coming through, and it really was about getting the whole parent-teacher organization, they used to call it at one time, where we were rowing the same way at the same cadence, because it wasn't that way before. And, in business, it's a little bit easier for the reasons that I talked about. But those are probably, for me, that's where it's been most successful in seeing it for folks because the children are our future. What really counts more there is how do we get there for them? I think we're seeing some challenges today here that I think we need some of that respect and leadership and figuring out how to come together. I think that's much needed, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I agree. It reminds me, I'm going to show my age here, of a Buffalo Springfield song where one of the phrases was, nobody's right if everybody's wrong.
That's exactly.
And, we need a little reflection on that these days.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right.
All right. So what would you say are some of the most important takeaways? You've mentioned in examples, which I think is great, but for you personally, some of the most important takeaways about respect and leadership that you learned during your career?
Probably that thing that I talked about in respecting thoughts and opinions. I think that's really big. I think using respect to form relationships. There are people who I've formed relationships over time that I knew didn't like me initially. And that relationship piece was forming those relationships have been so key, Charlie, because I will tell you, relationship is my number one currency. Relationships are my number one currency. When things go sideways in life, the relationships you've built, those are the ones that you can call on. If people respect you, respect how you treated them. And I think that's a huge element for me as it relates to this whole respect piece. I advise everyone. I mentor a lot of people, a lot of younger people. A lot's a relative term, but enough. Black, white, male, female, etc. And I tell them, make sure you show respect for others, because the relationships you build today are the ones that will be the ones that really pay off in the future. And so
Absolutely.
that relationship building piece is key, and it starts with respect.
100%. 100%. So tell me about a leader that most influenced you.
I don't know if there's a single one, Charlie. I probably have three or four.
Okay.
And I start with my grandfather. My grandfather was the greatest man I've ever known. And I mean, literally, and I've known a lot of people in my time. But my grandfather was a great man. He was part of the segregated South. He was a guy who owned a grocery store, gas station, cemetery. But at the same time, he also worked the same job, 40 hours a week. So he was employing people to work in his businesses while he actually worked for someone. And he was seen as a true community leader. People came to him, and I saw him as just kind of this giant, and I still do, this giant of a man who had respect for everyone. And I watched the respect that people had for him. And I also watched, and I've heard the stories growing up, and it would have been very easy for him to have hatred in his heart for what happened to him. It would have been very easy, but he loved everyone. He didn't have any bitterness towards anyone based upon how they treated him, for whatever reason they treated him the way they did. And so his character and how he carried himself probably it did influence me more than anything else and any other. And he was a leader in the church, all those things that happen in the community when you grow up, where I did, like I did. Probably two or three others, a guy out of New Orleans named Charlie Teamer, Charles C. Teamer. He's about 85 years old now. And, Charlie owned his own bank. He owned a hotel. He's a guy who we're part of the same fraternity. He was national president of the fraternity, all of those good things. And I watched his leadership style and how he's respected and carried himself. Another gentleman named Dr. Bill Picard, who, I feel influenced me greatly. Bill's probably 80, 81 right now. And those are the two people who are my mentors in life at the moment, and have been for a long time. And highly successful businessman. Bill is highly, highly successful. Very wealthy gentleman, but just as grounded and down to earth. And it's taught me, as I've come along in life, when you hit bumps in the road and you hit obstacles, and for whatever reason they're there, and whether or not it's caused by you or it's caused by someone else, because obstacles sometimes we cause our own.
Right.
Times they're caused by others. And, he's someone that I talk to him probably once or twice a week. And, and he's had the great opportunity to be a real leader over time. And so he's probably been very influential. And you notice none of the three were corporate people, interestingly enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, sometimes that's the case. It's the real people who've seen a lot, done a lot, and showed the right way, if you will, to respond. Yeah, that's very powerful. And so, first of all, thank you again for sharing all of your experiences here. I know it's a fairly short period of time compared to the breadth of your experiences, so perhaps we'll get a chance to talk again. But one more thing, if you're speaking to an upcoming leader, what advice would you give them?
Be a lifelong learner. Be a good listener. Don't let failure stop you from driving forward to your goals. And probably most of all, I'd say respect all, fear none. Fear does some damaging things to us, but when you respect all, fear none. I would say as you're an up and coming leader, that is a great thing. I've got a young man who I mentor who is once a quarter. He and I talk, and he's great and relatively young now. I'd say 30s is young now for us, Charlie.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, he is. He's an exec over in a very Fortune 100 apparel company, and he called me last week. He sent me a note because last time we were talking, he was asking, how do I navigate this whole mirage? I don't care what business, whether it's banking, retail, apparel, whatever it is. Similar political issues occur, and he said, look, man, I just got a new promotion. It's a global job, and I couldn't be prouder. It's like, for me, looking back and seeing how all the people that I mentor, their successes are great. And so I give them the same exact things. Lifelong learner, good listener, don't let failure stop you, and respect all, fear none. And I think those things will carry you through from a leadership perspective.
That's great advice, 100%. And again, I hope that we have a future episode where we can share some more of your experiences. So thank you, Walter.
Well, thank you for having me, Charlie. I really appreciate the opportunity. I don't know if this conversation is what you thought it would be, but it's always a pleasure, sort of sharing thoughts, sharing life's experiences, etc., with someone such as yourself. And congratulations on what I think is a great podcast. Really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. And as far as the conversation being what I thought it would be, the best part is it'll always be what it is. And,
That's right.
and it's not about what I want it to be. It's what I want everybody to understand the differences are out there and how they come together. So,
great. Well, thank you again.
I want to thank Walter Davis for being with us today, and I especially want to thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Respect. If you like what you heard today, please consider sharing the podcast and visit our website at expertsinhow.com. A quick reminder, if you'd like to read my book, The Power of Respect in Business, it's available on Amazon. Thanks again for listening, and remember, respect builds trust builds relationships, and relationships are the key to leadership.
This has been the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Likewise, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. To listen to more episodes and to learn about Charlie's leadership development programs, visit his website, expertsinhow.com.